So the basal forebrain is a second central nervous system, source of cholinergic projections around the central nervous system, around the brain. Remember, the first is the PPT in the brain stem, and that's sort of collectively shared with the other neurotransmitters we've been discussing. They also have brainstem nuclei that are their source, and axons that project out and release their neurotransmitters in different parts of the brain. But acetylcholine is kind of unique in that it has a brainstem source, the PPT, which goes to thalamus, and it also has the basal forebrain, which is located in here in the frontal lobes, below the cortex. There's subcortical nuclei, and there's a collection of these basal forebrain nuclei. I mentioned the nucleus basalis. There's a nucleus of the diagonal band of Broca. Just remember the basal forebrain, in the anterior portion of your cerebrum here, subcortically below the frontal lobe. There's a series of nuclei where the cell bodies are, expressing the genes for, the acetylcholine, vesicular transporter, the choline transporter, the, CHAT, the synthesizing enzyme, and also for acetylcholine esterase, which is the enzyme that, remember, degrades or breaks down acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft and ends the message. So in dementia, often there's a sort of degeneration of this, these subcortical structures, the basal forebrain structures, and then therefore a loss of, acetylcholine release in areas of the cortex, including areas in the medial temporal lobes where you have the hippocampus and, other structures in that medial temporal lobe, that MTL region, that are essential for, memory, declarative memory, sort of episodic memory, explicit memories, and also for other aspects of cognition. So the only, or some of the few FDA-approved drugs actually that can address the issues of dementia, they don't do a very good job because, to some extent these are degenerative diseases, so there's continued loss of basal forebrain cells in other areas of cortex with, disorders like diseases like Alzheimer's disease, for example. But there are some drugs that have been approved that actually target acetylcholine esterase, AIC, remember, which is our degradative enzyme, which takes the acetylcholine that's been released into the cleft and breaks it down. So what they do is they try to boost the signal of released acetylcholine in the remaining cholinergic projection cells, from the basal forebrain. So they target acetylcholine esterase, and they basically antagonize it. But they are what these chemicals are called reversible antagonists, because they'll or inhibitors. They'll bind to the acetylcholine esterase and change its shape, and that will temporarily make it unable to grab onto the acetylcholine and break it down. And then they'll release the acetylcholine esterase, and it will return, to its, active state, and we'll be able to break it down. So it takes some of the acetylcholine esterase, some of the degradative enzyme, out of the equation while the drug is on board, and that boosts the amount of cholinergic signaling, stimulation of the receptors at those remaining synapses. And there's some evidence that it slows the progression, of some of these disorders. These are not panaceas, though, because these are, degenerative diseases that continue to